Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to James Turk of GoldMoney.com. He's just returned from summer in America. So he's got his insights in what's happening in the economy in America. Let's see. Let's pick his brain. James, welcome back.
Thanks, Max. Great to be with you.
All right. So you've been in America. You know, Trump is a phenomenon there. He, Hillary Clinton referred to his voters as a basket of deplorables. Wow. Are there really 30 million racist, fascist Americans, or is the economy, what's going on there?
Yeah, I really think it's the economy. It's the same thing that we saw here with regard to Brexit, that people are concerned about the way economic activity is going, and they think it's better for the UK to go alone. And it's the same thing in the United States. There's a lot of people who are unhappy with the economic conditions in the country today. I was looking recently, for example, at manufacturing employment. That's still below where it was in 2007. So a lot of this economic recovery that we supposedly have is very weak. It's temporary type jobs and not permanent type career opportunities that are being developed.
Now, here's something very interesting. I think many have talked about it, but it's becoming more of an issue. The price of stuff people need is going up. The price of stuff they don't need is going down. In other words, for TVs and clothes, stuff that's imported from the countries that are now stolen America's jobs, the prices are going down. But for stuff like healthcare and education, the actual inflation number for those items is almost skyrocketing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And don't forget about taxes. Things like property taxes are going up. So yeah, the middle class is getting pinched, and it's basically because of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. My colleague Alistair MacLeod just wrote a wonderful piece about the impoverishment of the masses by Federal Reserve policy, and that's basically what it's doing. It's destroying savings, and it's therefore destroying the middle class, and that's unfortunate because savings in the middle class are the backbone of the capitalist economy in which we live.
Right. Well, there's a huge ideological split on this point, because you've got the Keynesians, you've got the Paul Krugmans of the world who say savings don't mean anything. It's just about demand. It's just about spending. It's just about borrowing. Savings are worthless. But let's move on to kind of this on the gold theme here on Trump. So Trump, one of his economic advisors, Dr. Judy Shelton, believes a return to a gold standard by first issuing gold convertible bonds could be a monetary solution to current problems. The partisan media has mocked her on this. Your thoughts?
Well, anything related to gold, the media is going to be pretty much against it. That's mainstream thinking. But Judy Shelton's a very bright lady. She's written a couple of wonderful books and understands economic and monetary conditions very well. And I do agree with her recommendations that we need some kind of stability in monetary policy today. We don't have that. All we have are a group of people sitting around a table making decisions, thinking they know better than what millions and millions of economic participants in the economy really know, down at the street level. And it's just like, the Politburo in the Kremlin. You can't manage an economy from a table in a Kremlin. You can't manage an economy from a table at the Federal Reserve. And ultimately, we're going to see a transition back to a new monetary policy, and hopefully we go the right way, which is away from fiat currency, debt currency, and into gold and silver, which is, of course, constitutional money.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, don't realize that in an economy like America that lauds itself as being a market economy with supply and demand ruling the roost, the price of money itself is not set by the market.
Yeah, you can't do that, and you can't have negative interest rates. It's a folly. 100 years from now, people are going to look back at this era and say, how could people have been so crazy to buy government bonds and get less money back in 10 years? That's absurd. That's not the way capitalism works. You're not being compensated for your risk. You're not being compensated for making investments. And so as a result, there's going to be a transition, and whether it's going to be a result of a surprise election or some other events, we don't know, but we have to be prepared for it. One of the best ways to be prepared, of course, is to own physical gold and physical silver. Now,
these negative rates have contributed to rising stock prices and property prices and bond prices, but they haven't outlawed human nature, and it hasn't outlawed the cycle of markets, and so we're now primed for another correction or a crash, or it comes every 7 years or so. But there's no tools in the toolbox. There's no way to deal with the crisis because you're at zero or negative, and you know, the European Central Bank, I read last week, they were underwriting the financing of a donut chain. You know, I mean, you can't just buy everything. You just can't buy. So how's that going to work, James?
Yeah, you know, there are a couple of interesting points there. First of all, as they buy more and more corporate debt, as they buy more ETFs and even shares of corporations, things are becoming nationalized, and that's not good. That's the destruction of private property. That's the destruction of private economy. But, you know, more importantly, you have to recognize that wealth comes in two forms. It comes in tangible wealth, and then it comes in financial wealth. And financial wealth is based on promises. You have counterparty risk. You know, will the person who's supposed to owe you money really make good at the end of the day? And one of the things I learned as a young boy, growing up in the late 40s and 50s from my parents who went through the Great Depression, is that after you have the financial bust, the real wealth is still there. The land is still there, the factories are still there, the houses are still there, et cetera, and the gold and silver, of course, are still there. And I think what we're going to go through in the foreseeable future here is that there will be another bust like the Great Depression, like 2008, but much, much worse, where a lot of debts are going to be reneged upon. A lot of promises are going to be broken. So I think the general theme still is to move out of financial assets where you have counterparty risk and move into real assets of all different sorts.
Now, there is a wild card out there. We've seen radical monetary policy on the part of the central banks with negative interest rates. There's another radical solution waiting in the wings that seems to be gaining currency. This idea that we can, in this global economy, roll up all these bad debts sitting on the central bank's balance sheets into a credit facility financed by the IMF and special drawing rights. In other words, they can create a $100 trillion credit facility, all the bad debts on the ECB, Federal Reserve Bank, Bank of Japan, Bank of England, swap for SDRs, and the game can continue. James Turk, your thoughts?
Well, the game has continued much longer than I expected, to be quite honest. They always seem to be pulling some kind of rabbit out of the hat to keep the debt bubble, you know, building and going. But, you know, eventually you reach the end of the line. There are just too many debts out there to be serviced. And that's one of the reasons why interest rates are so low. Governments cannot afford to pay a fair rate of interest simply because they have so much debt. For example, in the United States, you have $20 trillion worth of debt now. If the interest rates were to raise 1%, that's $200 billion to the annual budget expenses, paying interest on the debt. If you went to a fair interest rate of, say, 5%, that's $1 trillion. Well, the government only gets $3.2 trillion a year in revenue. Where are they going to cut, you know, spending to pay the extra trillion in interest expense? They're not going to do it, and that's ultimately leads to the destruction of the currency.
Let's talk about rich people. You know, rich people have tens of trillions of maybe not. I don't think it's 100 trillion. You would know better. But the amount of money that's in investable assets for the wealthy around the world, it's a lot.
Yeah, total wealth is about 100 trillion. They say.
About 100 trillion is sitting there. The wealthy people, they've got the 100 trillion, and less than 1%. And again, you would know this better, but I think around 1% or less is invested in gold and silver.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so let's say I'm a rich person. Let's say I've got 100 million, I've got $500 million, I've got $1 billion, and I'm being told that, well, we're going to bail out the global economy by turning the IMF into a super global national bank. Christine Lagarde's going to be Janet Yellen on steroids, and Ben Bernanke and Bank of Japan. We're going to create a $100 trillion credit facility, and we're going to roll everything up. Now, would you, A, decide to be like, well, that sounds reasonable, I'm just going to roll everything into an SDR? Or B, would you be like, you know what, I'm going to buy some gold? And if the rich folks out there with $100 trillion, and the whole gold market itself was like $6 trillion, they've got $100 trillion trying to go through a $6 trillion hole. So what happens to that hole? What happens to the price? I mean, what do you see happening potentially?
Yeah, well, I think the price of gold and silver are going to go much, much higher. But there's an important point that you're actually bringing up. You know, I think the rich really...
You say that like it would be a mistake. Like I'm actually bringing it up. Of course I'm bringing up a good point, James. I mean, that's the point of the show, to bring up good points. I've been doing it for 1,000 episodes.
Let's say a different point rather than a good point, in the sense that it's not just gold and silver going to benefit. I think the rich already understand that currencies are being destroyed. That's why if you look at property here in London, you know, prices are really sky high, and people are basically, the rich people are basically exiting the currency and moving into anything they can get their hands on. You know, that's why they're paying tens of millions for a Monet or for an Andy Warhol. Anything collectible, anything real, anything tangible. That's where the big money is actually moving into.
So we're already seeing this migration to stuff.
Yes.
We're already seeing it. It's just not hitting gold and silver. Why?
Well, you have the price suppression from central banks to try to keep gold and silver under control, because gold and silver are a warning
Is that a
signal.
conspiracy theory? I mean, in an age where Hillary's health was a conspiracy theory, then she's stumbling to the car. And we hear that 9/11 was a conspiracy theory, then there's 28 pages released that the Saudis did it. Gold and silver price suppression was a conspiracy theory, but now we've got ample proof around the world that, in fact, they are suppressing the price of gold in the markets using naked short selling, everything we've been talking about for years. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the mainstream media might call it a conspiracy theory, but factually, you can actually analyze all of the work that's been done by, for example, Gold Antitrust Action Committee, GATA.org. All that stuff's available for free on their website, and they've got, you know, over 15 years of data showing that it's not a conspiracy; it's actual fact.
Well,
it's monetary
I think
policy.
Deutsche Bank just admitted recently.
Yes.
They got the smoking gun.
Yes, exactly. And you've seen other instances as well.
You know, we're troublemakers, James. I got to step in here for a second, because remember a few years ago, we were talking about the fact that Germany doesn't have their gold. It's held in New York, and GATA started carrying the story. And now, you know, everyone in Germany had no idea that they don't actually have the gold in Germany. And it started this German request to repatriate gold from New York, and they said, we'll do it in 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Okay, how's that going? I mean, Amsterdam's repatriating, they're all repatriating, and the U.S. is saying, well, we'll take our time doing it. Should these countries be worried that they'll never see their gold?
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, there's no reason anymore to have gold stored in other countries around the world, because gold isn't used, as it was under the gold standard, to settle balance of payments differences. So what you really want to do is you want to have that gold safe and secure. So every country should have the gold stored back in their own country.
Is that part of the Russophobia out there? In other words, the U.S. is living in the 1950s, and they're claiming that the Cold War is on, and even though NATO is like building military bases on Russia's frontier, and U.S. jets are invading, you know, Russian airspace, they're claiming, you know, or threatening to push against Russian airspace in the Black Sea area. They claim that there's this existential threat, which was the basis for why a lot of countries moved their gold back during World War II, because of the Russian threat that Russia was still there in Europe, so Germany and France, these countries moved it out. They moved it to the U.S. So, but is that one of the reasons why we hear so much anti-Russian talk, is because the U.S. can say, oh, Russia's going to steal your gold, when in fact America is the biggest threat to stealing your gold. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it was America that confiscated gold back in the 1930s, but then
exactly.
But then again, so did Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler. They all confiscated gold. So, you know, who knows what's going to come in the future. But I always go back to what President Eisenhower said in his final State of the Union address when he left as president, that you have to be aware and concerned about and be alert to the military-industrial complex. And I would add it today to the military-industrial financial complex, because it's all one and the same.
All right, we got to leave it there. Military-industrial financial complex.
Correct. Be
warned. James Turk, thanks so much.
Thanks, Max.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, James Turk of GoldMoney.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Till next time. Bye, y'all.